I am the official host and the technical non-expert of Zoom. However, I'm on the controls and I try to make them work. And so I'm going to say very quickly, we're very happy to have everyone here. We have to keep people muted simply for sound and for the problem of Zoom bombing. So my apologies if you feel strangely silenced in this situation. And Ray and I have decided to continue the ENCLAVE series late September up until Thanksgiving. And we do have our readers, so I'm going to announce those at the end of the reading. But very quickly for now, I wanted to say, many of you have wondered how you could hear past readings. All you need to do is go to Google, put in Enclave, and then put in the name of the reader. These people all have Enclave YouTubes. It's YouTube. Lyn Hejinian, Fanny Howe, Rachel Blau Duplessis, Ron Silliman, Ed Roberson, John Yao, Bob Perelman, Lainey Brown, Peter Gizzi, Joseph Donahue, Lissa Walsack, After Today, Charles Bernstein, and finishing up the summer series will be Ray and me.
Also, Jerome Rothenberg.
Jerome Rothenberg, yes, thank you. He was one of the early ones. He fell off the list. Thanks very much, Charles. Okay, so I see Bernstein has become muted again, so I'm going to ask him to unmute. And I'm going to turn the mic over to Ray Armantrout, who needs no introduction. She has 14 books of poetry. She was a finalist for the National Book Award for partly for just Wobble. I'm sorry, I misread this. She had the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Critics Circle Award for verse. She's about to publish a new book, Conjure, so you'll get to hear that next week from Conjure. And she's a professor emeritus from UC San Diego. So turning the mic over to Ray.
Okay, Charles Bernstein's list of achievements is really too long to read in detail. We'd never get to hear him if I even tried that. But here are a few things about Charles. He has recently retired from his job as professor of poetry and poetics at the University of Pennsylvania. Before that, he taught at Buffalo. He co-created both the Electronic Poetry Center at Buffalo and UPenn and Penn Sound. He has been a theorist of the language poetry movement, and with Bruce Andrews co-edited the influential journal Language, with those infamous equal signs between the letters. He has published many, many books of poetry, recently including The Course, a collaboration with Ted Greenwald, out from Roof Books, Near Miss from University of Chicago, All the Whiskey in Heaven from Farrar Straus, Girly Man and Recalculating, both from University of Chicago. His critical works include Content's Dream from Northwestern University Press, though I think that was originally published by Sun and Moon, My Way, Speeches and Poems from University of Chicago, and Attack of the Difficult Poems, also from Chicago. He has been awarded an NEA, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and more recently, the prestigious Bollingen Poetry Prize, which was previously given to such luminaries as Ezra Pound, William Carlos Williams, Nathaniel Mackey, and Susan Howe. In 2006, Charles was elected a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Letters. And I've always wondered what they do in that secret cabal. Charles Bernstein is a trickster and a contrarian, a provocateur of the good kind, within both poetic and critical realms of discourse. He is deeply irreverent. If you've got a sacred cow, he's got a barbecue. But his impulse is not primarily negative. He celebrates and advocates migrating discourses across the borders of theory and lyric, intellect and emotion. He uses poems to ask what poetry is or should be, and then proceeds to skewer and demolish the very concept of should. He is the best kind of troublemaker, as shown in these lines, which I used to teach this poem. And it made students both amused and boggled. These lines from Lives of the Toll Takers. Our new service orientation meant not only changing the way we wrote poems, but also diversifying into new poetry services. Keeping up with the new aesthetic environment is an ongoing process. You can't stand still. So it's a little bit difficult to tell whether Charles is spoofing business language here by connecting it to the very unprofitable practice of poetry, or whether he is, in fact, spoofing an avant-garde poetics that tasks itself with keeping ahead of the literary Joneses and making it new. I can't quite tell, but that's what makes the poem so enjoyable. Bernstein fights against what he has called tone lock. Just when you think he's a jokester and he was influenced by Borscht Belt comedy, he's suddenly serious. On the other hand, if you think he's finally being serious, just wait. In recent books, his poems have sometimes flirted with folk ballad form, though not in a way that fetishizes authenticity. Here are the first and last stanzas of his poem, All the Whiskey in Heaven. Not for all the whiskey in heaven, not for all the flies in Vermont, not for all the tears in the basement, not for a million trips to Mars. No, I'll never stop loving you, not until my heart beats its last. And even then, in my words and my songs, I'll love you all over again. So you might start out reading this and think, that's funny, all the flies in Vermont, this is going to be comic. But it turns on a dime. And by the last stanza, you realize it's anything but funny. It's interesting to see Bernstein tread common ground, as it were, with lines like, I'll never stop loving you, without flinching. When Charles goes there, as they say, it seems like a part of his contrarian impulse. You can't tell him what poetry is or isn't. You can't tell him that experimental poetry must be familiarized. Charles is the Houdini of poetry. If you've got a box, he's got an escape. And with that, here he is. I hope. Go, Charles.
Hey, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
This piece is called The Tugboat and the Quail, and it has the epigraph from Neely Tchaikovsky. Sound precedes form. Zoom is where poetry goes to die, or where we dying go for poetry. Or is it the best available platform for poetry in the age of COVIDity? Zoom may also be where teaching goes to die, but it doesn't have to be that way. If interaction and discussion is favored over lecture and recitation, dialogue over monologue, poetry should be at least as interesting as television, which means, for one thing, not making sitting in front of a laptop the default posture. For poetry to be art, it needs to stand and stand back. It needs to dance. Zoom's live streaming hiccups may be its prime aesthetic given. If only we could dwell. Wait a minute, I'm getting a phone call here. Hold on. Hello? You know, I'm doing a live Zoom event. Yeah, I can't really talk now. Can I call you back later? Just a fantastic introduction by Ray Armantrout, where she says that when I'm joking, I'm not joking, and when I'm serious, I am joking. For a dyslexic like me, it's actually quite confusing. And next week in the series, Jeanne and Ray are going to be reading together, so that will be something not to miss. Yeah, very hot. Yeah, 90 degrees. Yeah, very hot. Yes, I know. Yes, yes, I know. Yeah, yes, I know. Yeah, yes. Look, I really should get off because I think it's not right to do it in the middle of the Zoom cast. Okay, I'll speak to you later. Bye bye. Oh, sorry about that. Zoom's live streaming hiccups may be its prime aesthetic given. If only we could dwell in those gaps. Who's got the buffering? I don't want to watch myself watching or watch you watching, in which case it's a society of the spectacle all over again, with facial icons muted to simulate presence in an overwhelming experience of absence, the body of the poem anesthetized. Poetry's medium is sound and rhythm, bodily gesture, sign and performance poetry, visual inscription, poetry plastique. Digital resources for poetry have been fundamental for poetry for 25 years. The Poetics List, Pen Sound, EPC, Eclipse, UberWeb, ModPo are just a few of the non-corporate possibilities. The audio of a reading can be sublime in a way the video of the same reading often isn't, but could be. I want poems that are ecstatic in the same way and in the sense that they exceed moral and political discourse. Poems as sensation, as performance, as aesthetic, doing rather than stating. Difficult poems that put readers in the middle of difficult circumstances that cannot be resolved through conventional position taking. More than an exaggeration, extravagance. An insistence that the rhetorical subsumes the expressive, for Amiri Baraka. Hatred of poetry, anyway, of its unruly aesthetic dimension, will always be more convincing than radicalizing poetry, especially if the hatred is pitched as care or cure. As Perry Bathos says, if young poets want conventional success, they need to aim for a reassuring balance between mediocrity and profundity. Anything else will ruin a promising career. My poems are ruined more than ruins. They are curiosities. Is it elegiac or is it satiric? Jerome McGann asks of Byron's Don Juan, citing this passage. Between two worlds, life hovers like a star, twixt night and morn, upon the horizon's verge. How little do we know that which we are, how less what we may be. The oscillation between pathos and comedy consumes and ignites me. I run amok of moral seriousness, which is as far from seriousness as which is as far from serious as firmament to fin, as McGann puts it. Like as to as and like to like, the seeming holds out promise false, breaking on double-edged shores of might, power, worry. Runa Bandyapatahe asks me what I mean by including the grey, in the list of dramatis personae that I added as a decorative flourish after finishing the pataquarical imagination that she calls my melody for the malady. Perhaps the presence of the grake suggests that rather than sharing one eye, every eye should have three within it. That's a good working definition of the pataquarical. Love me for who I am, not what I am, but who am I outside of what I am. A straw in the wind, a cry in the wilderness, a wave on the sea, a moment in time. We may all be in this together, depending on what this means, whatever the common menace, the outcomes will never be the same. Be deep below our difference is not interconnection, but incommensurability. Humanness is not so much shared as contested. Empathy and solidarity are crucial local investments, but acknowledging our uncommonness alongside our commonness grounds struggles to resist the hegemony of the universal. My poems are not an expression of my identity, but of my relationship to identity. Their value is as much for what they refuse as what they embrace. Not poem nor revolution erases the irreparable. In their aesthetic and moral unsettling, poems are provisional sanctuaries of freedom, unstable sites of imaginative reflection that can inform but not enact political transformation. Poets and other artists are or could be fantasists of unacknowledged worlds, but they are also canaries in the minds of the acknowledged world, carrying its viruses, tripped by its traps, crying wolf long after the fox has slaughtered the hens, and all the while pleading for credit. The need now is not just for the unrepresented, but also for the unrepresentable. I cannot accord sympathy to those who do not recognize the human comedy. Okay. This poem is called As If by Moonlight. It is what it was. It's not what it's not. It hurts where it hurt. It cut where it cuts. It counts when it could. It strays where it strayed. It stayed when it strays. It shudders as it shut. It dropped as it drops. It drips as it dripped. It was what it is. Shelter in place. It's no go from the get-go, strumming a mordant medley from the old days when we danced with abandon. Now we are abandoned. God's silence deafens us to each other, and the fiddlers diddle a familiar tune, familiar and deadly. Wake up, say those still small voices. The anthro-obscene is playing just north of here, and this is just a taste of what's to come. The death of Sean Bonney, 20th November 2019. Incandescent comet, double-cross night sky, blood-eat bowleg raging against the machine of our lives, as if liver were Blake's sword, and lyric enunciation, demolish tapestries of feigned accommodation. I never could be that. Drifting down in trust in nothing but dark flash of futile fissures. Death being an event not of this world, but coming, quixotic, immobile, free. This next is a poem in honor of Shields Green, Shields Green was born in 1836 and died in 1859. It's a kind of a long commentary, which I'll read first. A poem is not a monument, but my nomination for an American hero worthy of commemoration and commendation is Shields Green. Green, who had liberated himself from slavery, was 23 in 1859 when he was executed by the Commonwealth of Virginia as a result of his participation in the armed struggle against slavery led by John Brown. Green had met Brown at the home of Frederick Douglass. While Douglass declined to join Brown, he reports that Green said, "I believe I'll go with the old man." Douglass continued, Shields Green was not one to shrink from hardship or dangers. He was a man of few words, and his speech was singularly broken, but his courage and self-respect made him quite a dignified character. Douglass also reported that rather than escape capture after Harper's Ferry, he simply said he must go down to the old man. In an article on Green's trial, Stephen Lubit notes that Green's lawyer successfully argued that Dred Scott, decided just 2 years earlier, established that Green could not be charged with treason since he was not an enfranchised citizen who owed allegiance to the state. Denied the vote, Green had no obligation to be loyal to Virginia or to the U.S. With the treason charge thrown out, Green was convicted of murder and conspiracy. After the hanging, Green's body was seized for defilement by dissection by medical students from Winchester, Virginia. Lubit reports that 6 years later, the town of Oberlin created a memorial to Green and 2 other Brown freedom fighters from Oberlin. Quote, "These colored citizens of Oberlin," the inscription reads, "the heroic associates of the immortal John Brown, gave their lives for the slave. Et nunc servituto etiam mortuis es laus Deo." My poem is much shorter for Shields Green. The life lives after the life, as a seed is void in the world as is, opening paths to the worlds could be, if and as, where and when remains, sewn into the heavenly garment of the unknown, halfway between there and hereafter, lodged in an ether of time's remorseless ether, concoctions and fever. Justice is never abstract, but we abstract it at mineral peril against bodies laid waste in the pillage, hope's desperate pilgrimage. This poem is called Herd Immunity, and that's H-E-A-R-D, herd immunity. Sometimes, as I wander loose among pangs and pongs of unsolicited remorse, I cast aside the bromides that shield my thoughts from a disease I fear I cannot shake, casting stones across the waters of my losses, as one drowning imagines shore. The wreck of hope. Death is the end of all sadness. Storm follows each moment of bliss. Here lies the road to true madness, deeper than locks in abyss. Storm echoes surfeit of gladness. Loneliness lives by its wits. This poem is called Likeness. The heart is like the heart. The head is like the head. The stomach is like the stomach. The fingers is like the fingers. The sky is like the sky. The green is like the green. The ground is like the ground. The plants is like the plants. The birds is like the birds. The sin is like the sin. The soul is like the soul. The helplessness is like the helplessness. The hope is like the hope. The melancholy is like the melancholy. The seed is like the seed. The virus is like the virus. The fear is like the fear. The despair is like the despair. The change is like the change. The cops is like the cops. The tear gas is like the tear gas. The military is like the military. The fascism is like the fascism. The president is like the president. The Senate is like the Senate. The election is like the election. The eyes is like the eyes. The ears is like the ears. The strangeness is like the strangeness. The here is like the here. The presence is like the presence. The now is like the now. The is like the. The ness is like the ness. The of is like the of. The is like this of. The A is like the A. The Z is like the Z. The light, the light, the like is like the light. What time is it now? 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 What time is it? What time is it now? What time is it now? What time? What time? What time is it now? This is I's song after Rückert and Mahler. Comes I to this world abandoned, having wasted the time I was handed, till all that's left is the bandage. No matter unnoticed, time passes, slowly as dreams become lashes, still alone, caught in rhyme's ashes. Dead to this world's wrong, dwell still I in my song, in every thorn, at every morn. Wanderer's Night Song after Goethe. Over all peaks is rest. In creeks you feel hardly a breath. The hummingbird silent in crest. Just wait till you too will rest. Beeline. Bee in my bonnet stings all night long. Bee in bonnet all night long. No sooner morning comes, begin to holler and bawl. One time I'm up in the hen coop, next at a loading dock, afraid I'll tumble down the stairs, then that I may not be in bonnet. Stings night and day, dozen flights of angels, no one who knows the way. I'm game if you are. See you on other side. God says he's hiding. Hope to meet her 'fore I die. Be in bonnet. Stings me all night long. Dozen flights of angels. No one'll take me home. This poem is called Covidity. The COVID gonna get me. If not now, it will. The COVID gonna kill me. Find me where I live. Buried under covers, sheltered in the hall, trading goodbyes to all my friends through goddamn 15-foot walls. The COVID will get me bad. My lungs are weak, and I am much misunderstood. I practice social distance, even got an oversized mask. Feel like the Lone Ranger before he got the clap. The COVID gonna find me. If not today, in time, the COVID after me. Find exactly where I am. Call it social distance. I call it pain in the soul. You say I can handle it, but it's too heavy a load. The COVID round the corner will thrash me till blue. But that's not my worry. Terrified for you. You've always been distant, but not from me. Now I feel you drifting like you're far out at sea. The COVID gonna get me. If not now, any day. The COVID got my number, knows just where I stay. This poem is called Zeno's Way. 3 steps ahead, knock to floor. Get up, push 2 steps behind, knock down again. Get up, 2 steps ahead, time out. Push back 1 step, push ahead 3 steps, push back 1 step, push sideways 5 steps. Knocked out, wake up groggy. 5 steps to back in place. Continue on as before, as after. This poem is called Before the Promise. I wrote it for the 2020 class of Phi Beta Kappa of Eta, Ohio Wesleyan University. So for the graduation of that class last month. I drew a blank on a torn door, drew another, then no more. Got stung, peddled frowns. Knew things was bust, no way out of town. Sometimes it done it its way. Then again, harder to say. What's looking up decides to knock you down. Before the promise of tomorrow, tomorrow came. Morning on this pole, midnight at the other. Slipping, slapping, sliding on a cockamamie roll. Yesterday's dreams dissolve into today's goodbyes. I set out on a camel's hump, came back with just the eyes. Before the promise of tomorrow, tomorrow came. A further distance that we go within each moment spent than ever sent by heaven or scaled by human ken. Before the promise of tomorrow, tomorrow came. We twist, we turn, undo ourselves in triple throws. My goodness, how the time has passed. Let's get our stuff and beat a path to what we never knew, nor will, nor who, nor say, before the promise of tomorrow. Tomorrow came. Thanks very much. Good to be here with you.
Thank you very much, Charles. And the Charles Bernstein is like the Charles Bernstein. Ray, would you like to?
Well, I agree with that completely. The Charles is like the Charles. It's going to be a little bit hard for us to follow next week, but Jeanne and I are reading next week, so tune in at your usual time.
Yeah, so, and this will be our last summer reading. We will be beginning up late September for a couple months. And if you're curious, we have Joelle McSweeney, Cole Swanson, Erica Hunt, Rodrigo Toscano, Susan Gewirtz, Monica Yoon, Liz Willis, and Charles Alexander. So do tune in next week for Ray and me, but keep our late September, October, November series in mind. Anyway, it was great to have you all here, and it was great to be here with the Charles and the Charles Alexander.
To be here with you all.
Thanks.